everybody. It's Elise from the Cranston Public Library, and I am bringing you some hands-on science today. So today we are going to be doing a little bit of a science experiment followed by a little bit of a craft. So we put out our ingredients list a little bit earlier this week, the materials list of things that you'll need to do the craft. And we asked that you have some fresh flowers, wax paper or parchment paper, and a big heavy book. And I probably should have said in the materials, not a library book because of what we're going to use it for. I don't know if anyone was able to guess our science project, but we're going to be pressing flowers to preserve them. And preserving is when you take something like a flower and make it so that it can last a long time. I'm sure you've seen that if you pluck flowers from your garden, or if someone gets a bouquet of flowers, they look beautiful for a couple of days, but then they start to wilt and they start to look very sad, and then they start to turn brown and they start to dry out, and they're just not that pretty anymore. We're going to try and keep these flowers pretty for as long as possible, and then we're going to do a little craft with our preserved flowers. So this weekend is Mother's Day. If you know any moms or grandmas or aunties who are going to be getting some flowers, this could be a nice thing to do to make the flowers really, really last. So I went outside into my backyard and I got a couple of cute little purple flowers, and I found these, which are little like white flowers with purple around the edges, and I want to save these flowers. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our flowers and we are going to put them inside a book. And the reason why we're putting them inside a book is because we're going to press them. And the reason we're going to press them is to help preserve not only the shape of the flower, but also the color of the flower. So by pressing them, we're trying to dry them out because the water in the flower is really what makes it go all dry and crumbly. As the water leaves the flower, it dries out and gets really brittle. It gets really like papery and it'll fall apart if you touch it. So we want to press it to dry out the flower and get the water out. But by putting it inside the pages of a book, that keeps the light from touching the flower and taking the pigment, taking the color out of the flower. So if we preserve a flower by pressing it inside of a book, you can keep the shape of your flower and you can also keep the color inside your flower. And it also makes them nice and flat so that we can use them for our craft. So this is where your parchment paper or your wax paper comes in. And this is the part where I said if you're pressing flowers, you want to make sure you're not doing it inside a library book, because you want to make sure that everything stays nice and clean. So we're using the parchment paper or our wax paper to keep everything nice and clean. I'm doing this inside a cookbook because it's nice and wide and you can get a lot of flowers on your paper. So our first step is to take our flowers and just lay them out inside our book, and you want to keep them from touching each other. So give them lots and lots of room. And we will place our flowers just inside our book like so. Now at this point, you might want to smush your flowers stem down. I'm breaking the stems on my flowers a little bit, just so, especially these ones, because I like the inside and the way they look when they're all fanned out like that. I want them to press flat just like that as much as I can. So I'll show you. I laid my flowers down and I pressed them so that they're looking up, so that when I very carefully turn my book onto the flowers, they will dry looking just the way I want them to. So you take your book and you very carefully press it down on top of your flowers. And then what I like to do is take a bunch of big, heavy books and put them on top of the book with the flower to make a nice little stack so that they're all pressing down really, really hard on top of those flowers to get them as flat as possible, to make sure there's pressure on them so that they dry while trying to keep their color. Now, this is the hard part. I am not a patient person. I want to press my flowers like this, magically open the book and have them all set and all ready to go. But these things take time. Sometimes things that are worth doing take a long time, and you do have to wait with this project. So if you've already got your flowers, if you are following along with me, if you already pressed them down in your book, now I'm going to tell you something hard. You have to wait 2 weeks to open your book and take the flowers out. It's so hard. I want it to happen immediately. I want to just be able to open my book. But one thing I did that will help me with the waiting is I put the date. I shouldn't hold all these books. This is going to get dangerous. This is going to become a hands-on science about gravity instead of a hands-on science about preserving things. So I'm just going to hold my book. And if you look close, I put 2 weeks from today is going to be May 22nd, 2020. So at least I have a date when I know that my flowers will be done. So I take my books, put them back on, put them somewhere high, put them somewhere in a room that you don't go into, kind of forget about it. And then in 2 weeks, you'll be able to take your flowers out and you'll be able to do the second part of our hands-on science activity. The second part helps you to preserve the flowers even more, because even once you press and dry your flowers, eventually they are going to kind of fade a lot or get really, really brittle so that they'll fall apart if you touch them. Even if you preserve them doing this, it'll take longer, but it'll still happen. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a little collage out of our flowers. So these flowers I picked a little bit more than a week ago. I already pressed them and I took them out. So these are all set to go, and I'm going to show you what I did. So I took a little bit of Elmer's glue and I added a teeny tiny bit of water to my glue just to make it a little bit thin so it's not so thick and gloopy. And then I just painted some of the glue onto a piece of paper. I'm using a very thick kind of piece of paper called cardstock. You could also do this on construction paper or poster board. But if you do this on printer paper, you can. It's just because the paper is thin and the glue is a little bit wet, it might get kind of wrinkly. But that's okay, whatever paper you have, paint a thin layer of glue. And then I have some other flowers that I pressed last week. You can see that they are nice. Oh, that one was so thin, I didn't even pick it up. You see they're nice and flat. And then you just lay them out on your paper right where you did the glue. So you just stick them right on down. Oh, this one didn't get on the glue. There we go. Stay there, flower. So you just stick those right on down. And that is the first step. That step helps you keep your flowers on the paper. I did these a little bit ago, so the glue is all dry that I painted onto the paper. So once you've got your pressed flowers, you stick them down in the glue, you stick them on your paper, you let that first layer of glue that you used to stick your flowers on dry, and then you take your thinned out glue and you paint over the flowers. I'm just going to do a little bit to get started. And you want to be gentle, because your flowers, even though they're dry and they're preserved, they're going to be a little bit brittle. Like I said, a little bit prone to breaking. So you just want to do a nice thin layer of glue, nice and gentle over your flower. So I'm doing this with a sponge brush because that allows me to be super, super gentle. And I'm not doing it with a paintbrush because sometimes the bristles on the paintbrush can fall off and kind of stick, which could be a cool decoration if you're into that. But I'm doing this with a sponge so I can be as gentle as possible. And you might have to do this a couple of times. So you get your glue on your sponge and you just paint gently, gently over your flowers. And what the glue does is it keeps the flower in place, but it also creates a barrier from the air so that it helps keep your flowers, your pressed flowers, looking as preserved and fresh and as colorful as possible for as long as possible. So if you're going out and you're picking flowers in your garden, or you get a present of a bouquet of flowers for Mother's Day, or for another reason, a birthday or a holiday, or just because you like flowers, you can do this to keep them around a little bit longer. So I'm just making art with mine, but you could also fold this up and you could make it into a card, or you could even paint a little frame around it and give it as a present. So I know this weekend we might not be able to visit everyone in our family that we want to visit for Mother's Day so you could get some flowers, you could preserve them, and the next time you're able to see your relatives, you could bring them the flowers that you preserved and say, I got them for you for Mother's Day. Here they are at some time in the future when you're able to visit. So yeah, you could take your flowers, you just paint over them, and then again, we have to be patient. We have to leave that to dry before we do another layer of glue over the flowers. And that is basically our lesson for today. Let's go over what we did. So step number one, you go out and get flowers. And this is an important thing. Only pick flowers that you have permission to pick. If you have flowers in your yard or your mom or dad has a garden, make sure you ask them, and it would probably be a nice idea to go out and pick them with them. Or if it's flowers that you received as a present, make sure you ask before you use those flowers. But first step, you go out and you get your flowers. Step number two, you get some wax paper or some parchment paper and you line the pages of a book. Put your flowers down and then press, press, press. And then the hardest part, you leave it for 2 entire weeks. I know it's really hard, but after 2 weeks, you'll have your flowers. And then the final step, the third step to preserve them, you put some glue down on a piece of paper, you stick your flowers down, and then gently, gently put layers of glue over the top. So I'm using Elmer's glue, and Elmer's glue dries clear, so you don't have to worry about any funky white colors coming in and glooping up on top of your flower. And cutting the glue with a little bit of water helps it be nice and thin, and so it's not as clumpy, it's not as thick, and so you just get the pretty image of the flowers on your paper instead of getting the pretty image of flowers on your paper plus glue all over the place. And then you can make this into a card, or you can make it into art, or you could even punch a hole on the top and hang it up and have it be a nice springtime decoration in your house. So if any of you guys find some flowers, pick some flowers, or make some flowers. If you don't have flowers in your house, if maybe somebody is allergic and flowers make them sneeze, you can still do this part of the project without using fresh flowers. If you have construction paper or colored computer paper, you can color in or cut out flowers and then just do exactly what I did here with a piece of construction paper or a flower that you colored in. You just stick it down with glue and then put a couple of layers of glue over the top, make it nice and flat, and that can be your card or that can be your decoration. You don't have to use fresh flowers to do this, but if you happen to have fresh flowers around, this is a nice way of preserving the flowers so that they keep their color and they last longer. Or you can just make a beautiful floral decoration with just using paper or crayons or markers. So I hope that you guys enjoyed today's hands-on science. And if you make one of these decorations with fresh flowers or with computer paper or colored in flowers, we'd love to see it. Send it to us at Cranston Public Library. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another science project. Bye.